Hello everyone and welcome once again to the Los Angeles sideboard here at the Invitational. I'm here with Brian Kibler. You guys just saw Brian Kibler on round 1 of SCG Live playing this deck, which is sweet. It's green, mostly green, pretty standard for you obviously.
I do like a green creature.
But we've gone with some additional black, specifically for removal and some of the gold creatures that we got out of Return to Ravnica. So why don't I just go ahead and let you start off by explaining why we're playing green deck with no Thragtusks, which I think is uncommon.
Well, I actually originally started working on this deck in response to basically the Rakdos decks and the Bant decks. I was looking for a deck that matched up well against the Rakdos decks, the aggressive decks in the format, that wasn't vulnerable to Supreme Verdict. So, I wanted to have a deck that was able to be fast enough to actually put enough pressure on the Bant decks while having the tools to fight back against the Rakdos decks. And Thragtusk doesn't fit well in that plan. When you're trying to beat decks that are built to beat Thragtusk, you don't really want Thragtusk in your deck to try and beat them. And Thragtusk is just a terrible card against control decks. You're paying 5 mana for this just dirtily creature that's just not going to get the job done. They have their own Thragtusks. They have Dissipates. They have plans to beat Thragtusk too. Sure. So the idea was that I wanted to play a deck with a lot of very durable creatures and disruption that would be able to give me a good matchup in both those directions.
You've definitely got guys that are durable to removal, even more so than Thragtusk, because Leaves Play Trigger leaves a 3/3 behind, but obviously you've got guys who don't even leave play at all. Predator Ooze, Strangler guys, gets better. Lotleth Troll sticks around, and then you've got Wolfir Avenger sticks around. Deadbridge Goliath and Dreadmangler are also both huge scavenge guys, which can turn any of those creatures into huge threats that'll outclass the Thragtusk immediately. So let's talk a little bit more about the black-red matchup. You've clearly got some removal going on with the Tragic Slip, Ultimate Prices. You have more Tragic Slips on the board.
Yep.
Do you find yourself racing the deck more often, or do you assume the control role there?
You're mostly playing control. I mean, you have the ability to be the aggressor, but you're generally trying to control their aggression and stay alive. One of the most important cards there, and in most of the aggressive matchups, is actually Uvenwald Tracker. Yeah. This is a card that I was playing a lot in my green-white decks early in the format, and felt like it was one of the best cards in the deck. And it's actually even better, in fact, way better here than it was in any of those decks. The synergy that Uvenwald Tracker has with regenerators like the Avenger and Lotleth Troll, and in particular with Predator Ooze, is just gross. I've actually been playing this deck a lot on Magic Online over the past few weeks. I've had multiple opponents concede on turn 2. When I play turn 1 Arbor Elf, turn 2 Tracker Troll, there's like my deck cannot defeat the Abyss. You win. And I mean, there are those sort of things that actually happen in lots of matchups. Even against mid-range decks, like say, the Naya decks that have become pretty popular. They're pretty hard-pressed to actually deal with Ooze until it becomes a 5/5 and they can Selesnya Charm it. So you can frequently just use your Ooze plus Tracker to just mow down all of their guys. Like Huntmaster, nope, he loses in a fight. All that stuff, just everything's food for the Ooze.
Yeah, as these Naya decks that emphasize Thragtusk are becoming bigger, removal gets a little bit worse, which in turn makes a guy like Uvenwald Tracker awesome. Because if you're just going to be leaning on Bonfire of the Damned as your only resource to remove a board position, and that's obviously not a very good card against this deck in and of itself.
Sweepers are particularly bad against this deck. I've played, again, a ton of Magic Online. Keep playing against a bunch of Bant decks, blue-white red control decks, blue-white decks. And the number of people who just concede with multiple Supreme Verdicts in hand is pretty hilarious. Because it's like they have Supreme Verdicts, and my board is Avenger, Troll, Ooze, and these cards just don't do anything.
I can pay 4 mana to do nothing.
Yeah, and in my sideboard I have Duress, which is particularly good against those control decks, and I will almost all the time Duress you, leave Supreme Verdict in your hand, take something else, because that card is bad against me in a lot of situations.
All right, so moving on to the sideboard, you mentioned the Duresses, you have Appetite for Brains to go along with them. I already discussed the Tragic Slips. Let's talk about the Ranger's Gauntlet, because I think that's the most interesting card on the board. So
one of the cards that impressed me the most when I was playing green-white was Faith Shield. Faith Shield's ability to allow you to maintain pressure through tempo plays like Unsummon and Azorius Charm, or removal like Ultimate Price or Detention Sphere is very important. And being able to protect your Predator Oozes, which most of the cards in most people's decks can't do anything about. Yeah. Between Duress and Ranger's Guile, you're able to protect your Oozes from just those cards that can possibly stop it. And you take your opponent's Azorius Charm, and they do not have long to deal with the Ooze before it just eats them.
Yeah, he grows quickly, especially more so when you've got things like Uvenwald Tracker obviously backing him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with Rancor, chump blocking, no good.
Yeah, I mean, I've had enormous Oozes, and which goes particularly well with Garruk Primal Hunter in those control matchups. They're trying to Supreme Verdict away your creatures, it doesn't work. You have this giant Ooze, maybe they're trying to Azorius Charm it. can duress and Ranger Style, or you can just draw a million cards with Garruk and start all over.
I think Garruk's Neg 3 is becoming pretty big in this format. In a lot of the mid-range matchups, the +1 is actually not even very good. You're just stalling a board that's already stalled, but the Neg 3, getting you the cards to jump ahead,
the most important
big game.
The most important element of that card is the -3 ability to draw a bunch of cards. And like you said, the +1, you're frequently, that'll end up making a guy who, maybe you'll make that guy just so you can try and draw 3 again later.
Right. The greedy Neg 3.
Right, exactly. You're just trying to set up to draw, but it is very rare that 2 turns in a row you make a 3/3.
It's worth noting also that people are trying to jump over Thragtusk with like Aristocrats and Thundermaws and stuff, obviously plussing Garruk becomes even worse.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's a big reason I think that Garruk in a lot of decks isn't really nearly as good as it used to be. Because, boosting up your Garruk, like you said, just gets it killed by one of the haste flyers. But in a deck like this, where you're actually able to put a bunch of pressure on your opponent, a lot of the decks that have Garruk are much more defensively oriented. You see Garruk in some of the Bant decks, some of the Naya decks, but this deck you're actually able to be putting pressure on your opponent, and frequently you just reload with Garruk, and you don't really care about the +1 anyway.
Yeah, the pressure is also an excellent way to make sure you get to resolve your creatures. You don't have Cavern of Souls because your mana base is obviously a little.
Well, I also have a couple
tricky,
of creature types.
A couple different ones.
I actually, in my match just now, I played against a humans deck that had Riders of Gavany, and he's like, I'll play Riders of Gavany, I'll name, picks up Deadbridge Goliath. Insect, I guess. So not quite. Cavern of Souls not quite as good in my deck. Riders of Gavany not quite as good against it.
So we built this deck basically to come at these control-y decks and the black-red decks. What is the matchup you're kind of afraid to match up yourself again with?
I haven't found it yet.
You haven't found it yet?
I mean, that's the sort of thing that a lot of times people say, and they're just like, "Oh, my deck beats everything." But I mean, I've been playing this deck a lot over the past week and a half, and I've basically yet to find a deck that I'm just like, oh, I don't want to play against it. Mono red, it's an incredibly easy matchup. You have stuff like Ooze that they can't possibly deal with. Strangler guys, these things are all super good against them. Black red, similarly, you have a bunch of creatures that are just better than theirs and match up very well against theirs. The Bant decks, all the mid-range control decks. I haven't found one yet that I don't want to sit across from.
All right, well, best of luck with it, Brian.
Thank you very much.
We're off to a fine start.